Pillars of Eternity 1 Complete Edition Guide. Companion Hiravias Druid build from level 1 to level 16. This build was made to work on Pot of the Dam difficulty, and if it works on the hardest difficulty available, it will work on all other difficulties as well. Let's not waste time. Let's go. First, to say some things about the Druid and what it is. Druid can be played in plethora of different ways. Whether it's gonna be a shapeshifter druid, melee druid, range druid, melee caster druid, only flat caster druid, ranged caster druid, like plenty of options, okay? And druid is actually a slightly weaker version of cleric, but still very OP and absolutely one of the best classes in the game. Spells on the druid are just way too freaking good, and that's why we won't focus this build as a shapeshifter or as a melee shapeshifter or as a melee caster. We're gonna play as a straight up caster druid, because again, spells are just so freaking brilliant that there is no need to mix everything up with other build variants. Yeah, so let's begin with Hiravias and let's create a druid. So Hiravias as a druid on level 2. What we want on Hiravias is lore, and the rest of the points will go into survival until we reach 7. The very first talent we're gonna learn on a druid is Heart of the Storm for increased shock damage. On level 3, we're going into survival, 3 points into it until we reach 7, and we say next. Now druid gets his power spike with a lot of different spells. On level 4, druid, we go survival, we say next. And now we're gonna take Wild Strike to shock, because on a previous level we took the spell that raises shock damage as well. So Wild Strike shock, when he shapeshifts, additional shock. On level 5 we're taking survival, and now all of the points from now on will go into lore, so you can use scrolls on a druid. We can put 1 point into athletics for the second wind, and now we're going into lore. On level 5 we go with a greater Wild Strike shock for additional shock damage. On level 7 we go into lore, say next. Again, a power spike. Druid is very simplistic to level up, yeah. Now we say next. Lore again, level 8, next. What we want on a druid now is next element, and it's gonna be freeze. Okay, so now we take 20% freeze damage with Secrets of Rhyme as a talent. On level 9 we're going with lore, and now it is time for the spell Mastery. We can only learn 1 spell, and nearly all druid spells are extremely useful, so which one is the best? Now this really depends out of your main watcher, out of the main character, whether you're gonna have Durance in your team or not. If you are about to play without Durance, you need to play Hiravias as a healer, supporter, buffer, debuffer druid. That's without Durance, and then we would go for Nature's Vigor, for example. But if you play with Durance in your team, then you can opt in to play your druid as a damage dealer, spell damage dealer. So in this case, we can take Sunbeam or we can take Talon's Reach. Also, because of the spell Mastery into shock, in this case, it would be Dancing Bolts. Now, how does everything work? If we took fire damage, we would take Sunbeam through talents. If we took freeze damage through talents, then we would take Winter Wind. Okay, in this case we took shock damage, so we're gonna master Dancing Bolts. Okay, for the extreme shock damage. Which one is the best without masteries? Definitely it's Talon's Reach. It deals the most damage in the huge area of effect. Sunbeam is the best utility damage dealing spell because of the blind on top of the burn damage. Okay, but that's for the burn damage druid. Now if you like Sunbeam, instead of the shock, you're gonna take fire and you're gonna upgrade Sunbeam. And basically with this druid build on Hiravias, I'm giving you like 4 different druid builds. It just depends what talents you take for what in the increase for the specific elemental damage. Fire, frost, corrode, and lightning. What we're gonna take in this case, we're taking dancing bolts. On level 10, we're going to lore, we say next, and for the talent now. Now for the talent, because we're gonna play with spear, we can always opt in and go with a one-handed style to convert hits to crits with a spear. On level 11, we're keeping the points for lore, and we say next. And now it's spell mastery tier 2. Straight up, the best spell would be the insect swarm. There is nothing to talk about or discuss here. Insect Swarm is the best spell that you can master on tier 2. I don't say how the other spells are not important. They're very important. They're very good. Most of the druid spells are extremely good, but we're gonna master Insect Swarm. And of course, we get a huge power spike with additional spells. We're gonna pass through all of the spells very soon. On level 12, we're taking lore. We say next. And for the talent now, we're gonna take Peasant, Weapon Focus, because of the spear accuracy. On level 13, we're taking lore, we say next, and now it's spell mastery 3. This is very simple, it's the returning storm. Shock damage, this is shock druid with shock talents, lightning damage druid, and we're going with the spell mastery returning storm. If you opted in to play with other builds, then you're gonna take something else. Okay, if you play, for example, without Durance in a team, then it's nature's balm, and so on. Now we're taking Returning Storm in this case. On level 14, we're keeping points for level 15. We say next. And for the talent now, for the talent, we're gonna take Scion of Flame. Not only because of the burn damage increase, but also because of the flat damage reduction on burn. On level 15, we're taking lore, keeping the points for the next level. And now it's spell mastery number 4. What we gonna do on number 4? Without Durance in your team, or better to say without a cleric, you would need to take Moonwell. But in this case, all spells are amazing, but what we're gonna take is an overwhelming wave because of the stun. Stun is extremely OP in this game, and this is a huge stun, especially when you cast it on squishes. So overwhelming wave it is as the spell mastery. On the final level, level 16, we're taking some points into stealth, the rest goes into athletics and stealth, and we finish up with 3, 3, 12, 1, 7. 7 because of damage reduction tier 2. For the final talent, for the druid, it's very simple, we're gonna take Spirit of Decay, because with 2 call elemental talents, we're gonna take the final one that would be Corrode, and we're finishing up druid like this, full elementalist druid, in other words. Strongest with shock damage. Now if you took other talents and went into other type of damage, then you're focusing fire talents, fire druid, corrode talents, corrode druid, and so on. Decide what you want to play with. Basically these are 4 builds into one guide. Yeah, 4 different builds. How do we play druid? Always when you want to go in melee and you don't want to waste spells, you want to conserve them for later or on easier fights, you can just spirit shift into a Stelgar and go into a fight as a melee, and that's about it. That's very simple. Now the complicated part would be a caster druid with all of these spells over here, because there's plethora of spells to play with. I'm gonna divide druid into early game druid from 1 to 3, mid game druid from 4 to 6, and tier 7 and tier 8 spells would be the late game druid. What do we use the most and what's the best in what scenario? In our case, because we're playing the shock druid, we're gonna use dancing bolts the most out of all spells. Okay, this is like bread and butter that you're gonna use and spam like crazy. If you played with a fire druid, then you're gonna use the sunbeam. If you opted in to play as a freeze druid with talents, then you're gonna use winter wind, although the spell absolutely sucks because it's in cone. Okay, so the one that you're gonna spam would be dancing bolts. Now what about supportive spells on tier 1? The best supportive spell would be nature's vigor. It does what cleric is supposed to do, heal and give maximum health to allies. This is the one you're gonna use the most outside of the damage dealing dancing bolts. Also, when you fight stronger enemies and you want a good debuff, nature's mark is how you always gonna open up fights. Okay, you remove deflection and reflex from enemies. Very useful. Especially when you cast spells with a lot after the druid. Nature's Mark is probably the best tier 1 debuff in a game. As far as early game tier 2 goes, the best one by far is to summon a Blight, Rain Blight, Wind Blight, and it's an extra unit on a field. It delays enemies until you buff up, prepare spells with others, and so on. Definitely the best tier 2. This is how you're supposed to open up all of those fights, basically, by time with Blight. The best opener, aside from the Conjure Blights, would be the Woodskin, of course. It gives flat damage reduction on Pierce, Shock, Burn, and Slash for 20 seconds. Very good opener for the entire team. This buff also has a huge area of effect, so you're gonna cover the entire team with this. As far as the damage dealing goes, it's Insect Swarm and nothing else but Insect Swarm. I would not recommend to go for anything but Insect Swarm in the case of Caster Druid here, because this is just way too good to skip. And early game, tier 3, what's the best? Of course, it's Infestation of Maggots. Deals crazy amount of damage, but because we play the Shock Druid, you always want to cast at least one Returning Storm for constant damage over time with Lightning. This is like one of the most unique Druid spells. It defines what Druid is after all. Returning Storm. When you fight rougher opponents, tier 3 Spreading Plague is absolutely great, especially against bosses. This is a great debuff as far as tier 3 goes. That would be early game spells, best spells on a druid. Now the mid game, tier 4, 5, and 6. What do we use? When do we use it? How you opened up early game with a small blight. Now you're gonna open with classic blight, or better to say medium blight, rain blight, wind blight, earth blight. This is gonna buy you extreme amount of time to buff up all allies before entering combat. And this is the best freaking thing that exists on a druid as far as tier 4 goes. It buys time. Very simple. How you open up fights from afar? You open up with a Hailstorm. Hailstorm is nuts. As you can tell here, it's a great opener, and you can open up like triple opening with, for example, Alot's Fireball, Duran's, I don't know what, Pillar of Holy Fire, and Hailstorm from Druid. That's triple opener. All you need to do is pause the game and tell them to cast, and then unpause, and it's gonna be crazy, okay, amount of burst damage over time. Absolutely the best crowd control spell on in mid-game, better to say, would be the Overwhelming Wave. It's a stun, okay? You see how it's stun? Like, there is no replacement for Petrify, for stun, for paralyze. You completely disable enemies, man. Those would be tier 4 spells. Mid-game tier 5 spells, one of the best would be a Firebug. It jumps from enemy to enemy and it deals burn damage. Also, a great one would be Plague of Insects, and this is probably the thing you're gonna spam the most, but you always wanna go with Relentless Storm. This is like an upgraded version of the Returning Storm. Now you're gonna spam Relentless Storm. When you wanna disable enemies, or especially bosses, then you're gonna use Embrace the Earth Talon, because it gives Petrify for nearly 9 seconds, and it's extremely good against bosses. In all other cases, you spam Relentless and you spam Firebug into Plague of Insects. Truth to be told, you just don't know what's better. In the case of Shock Druid, we're gonna spam Relentless Storm. In the case of Fire Druid, we're gonna spam Firebug. Now it depends what build you decide to play with. As far as tier 6 goes, this is very simple. Now we conjure Greater Blight and then we open up a fight. Okay, there we buy a lot of time to buff up all allies with Durance, with self buffs on everyone, then with buffs on Druid and so on, and you become way much stronger. Greater Blight buys you additional time. The best tier 6 spell by far is the Sunlance, especially if you opted in to play as a Burn Druid. If you play as any other type of elemental druid, then you're probably gonna use Venom Bloom, because the spell is absolutely amazing. Not only that it deals damage over time, it also provides a huge debuff, and it lasts long. You usually wanna put this spell on a choke points in front of your tank, so enemies remain as long as they can inside of the effect. Now, mega late game with tier 7 and tier 8. This is quite simple. How we open up the fights? We call the Primordials and we summon Uzias and we buy extra time. What do we do in the meantime? In the meantime, we cast the one of the best AoE buffs on all allies, flat damage reduction, burn, shock, freeze and corrode for 15 seconds, and we enter the fight. That's the opener on tier 7. On tier 8, you can open up with Tornado. Okay, that's very useful, but I would say this is like bread and butter, and this is why we play Shock Druid, this spell, Avenging Storm, because it's the best freaking thing that exists on a Druid. And that's why I gave an example through this build of the Shock Druid, not Burn Druid, not Corrode Druid, and so on. I gave Shock Druid because of the Avenging Storm. That's how great the spell is. Also, you can always summon a Fire Stag, extremely OP summon. Do not forget that you have your mastery spells, use them instead of wasting points. Keep those spells for the harder fights, while always waste mastery spells first in combat. Now, what about itemization for the Druid? This is very simple. We play with a spear. The best one would be Clothaliat, and the next one would be the Vile Loner's Lance. Pick what you like to play with. You can play basically with any weapon on a caster Druid, best with wands, rods, scepters, and spears. Your choice what you wanna do. For the helmet, we go with Garrott's Chorus for extra might and retaliation. Cloak, very simple, fortitude, reflex, will. As far as rings go, Gwyn's Band of Union for extra intellect, bigger area of effect. For the other ring, it's flare up deflection for some extra defenses, because Druid is very squishy. For the bracers, flare up spell damage 10% with bracers of spiritual power. For the boots, we go with flat movement speed. You can go with plenty of different boots on a Druid. It's your choice what you want to do. I like move speed. And for the belt, we go with a Wild Strike belt with the Wild Strike burn on a Spirit Shift when you Spirit Shift as a Druid. That also, you can get some other belt with flat up attribute stats, what you think that you need. After all, you don't need to play with this one if you don't like it. And for the armor, the best armor on Druid is light armor. So what we got for the light armor is these three: Raiment of Vale's Eyes, Randall Finery, and Husk of the Great Western Stag. Then we got medium armor, then we got also light armor, and into Wayfarer Hide. So Alarin Jacket, Hand and Key, Wayfarer's Hide. And the last two would be Robes of the Tidebringer and Starlit Garb. All of this is valid on a Druid. Now, which one is the best? The best by far is Raiment of Whale's Eyes, because of the mirror image and extra defenses, and as well as tons of extra defenses for the passive, as well as extra enchants that this armor offers. Okay, the next one, if you lack perception, this would be the Husk of the Great Western Stag. Also very valid. The next good one would be Alarin Jacket, because of the Eye Strike. And the last good armor would be Robes of the Tidebringer. Now, how would you play with the Robes of the Tidebringer? Basically, when you waste all of your spells, okay, with a Druid, and Druid becomes completely useless, and you still want to fight and you wasted those spells, you just send Druid to die. When Druid dies, he gives Martyr on unconscious, or better to say, he's gonna give all allies 30% attack speed as his final buff. It's quite a troll armor, but it works, and it's very, very good. So you can also consider playing like a troll Druid if you want to. But I would really say stick with those light armors that I say that are good. Veil, Great Western Stag, and Alarin's Jacket. That would be Hiravias as a Druid. As I said, you can play him in a lot of different ways. We opted in for the Shock Druid because of the crazy good Shock spell at the final tier, and I created the entire build because of that. So if you like other spells, go with it. I would recommend having Durance as well on top of the Druid, because they're insane together, as well as Alot, full casters party. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you on the next one. Thanks for watching.